week, India decided to opt out of the RCEP, or the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, that would see 10 ASEAN nations and 6 other trading partners, including China, Australia and New Zealand, come together for a first of its kind free trade agreement. The negotiations to ink this deal have been going on since over 7 years, 2012, and India's decision to pull out was based on concerns that the agreement would flood the Indian market with cheap goods and local industry would just not be able to compete. The deal, which would have covered half the world's population and 40% of global trade, has now, for all effective purposes, been put on hold unless the other nations move on without India. So was the decision to pull out of the RCEP the right one, or a protectionist one that could do more harm than good in the long term? We're seeing all views on this out there. So today we're going to look at both sides of the story in this face-off of sorts. I'm joined today with Pradeep S. Mehta, Secretary General of Cuts International, and Dr. S.K. Ghosh, Group Chief Economic Advisor of the State Bank of India. Welcome to both of you and thank you for speaking with us. Mr. Mehta, let me begin with your take and why I believe you think it's not such a great idea that we walked out of RCEP.
It's not a great idea for the simple reason that we need such agreements, considering the fact is that the WTO is in a kind of a limbo, and we need market opening to improve our own performance. Now, my problem is that we have been reforming for 30 years, and even now, if our industry is not ready, then it's a big question mark. Secondly, there are 15 countries in the RCEP. If we are worried about imports from China, what about the 14 others or 13 others? Are they also equally worried? Now, we are competing with China in terms of manufacturing. We want to occupy the space that they are leaving behind due to increasing labor costs. Now, in the event we do not face this competition, we will be in a serious problem. Now, whether or not you have an agreement, you will continue to trade. So it is not as if your market is going to be, is not going to be flooded. It is already being flooded by cheap Chinese goods. Now, let me take you back to when the WTO was being signed in 1994. There was a huge hullabaloo that we will get into a problem and so on. Following the coming in of the WTO, we lost a dispute on our reservations of consumer goods imports, and which was matched by a small-scale reservation in India. We lost it. We had to open our market. We, in fact, even then de-reserved many of these items in the small-scale sector. But did we lose out in the end? In the end, we continued to gain. I mean, our industry became more competitive, and consumers gained. We tend to always ignore the issue about consumer satisfaction. If a poor consumer was getting a battery cell for 6 rupees, he was now getting it for 2 rupees. And that is something which you have to understand, that 4 rupees for a poor consumer is a hell of a lot of money. And therefore, the backtrack of RCEP. And on the other hand, the Minister Piyush Goyal speaks about entering into a free trade agreement with the US or with the EU. I mean, both are welcome, but they're going to be tougher than what we have seen in RCEP.
Okay.
And I'm sure if we have a 1-year time in order to get back into RCEP, we should be able to get back.
Okay, so that's the first set of arguments saying that perhaps it was not the greatest idea to come out of RCEP. Soumyakanti Ghosh, do you want to respond to that, and why you think, as you have said today in a newspaper article you wrote, that it was absolutely the right decision?
No, yes, I think that in the current form, it's not possible for India to get into the RCEP. I think, let me just push a little bit back. I think if you remember during the 2008 financial crisis, even though I think this protectionism which has been happening throughout the, throughout the world is not inimical to the global growth. But let me rewind and to 2008. when because of this global financial crisis, US actually had looked inward, and thereby they started the production of shale, and today you say how it is doing on the shale production. Now, if we fast forward to that, the numbers doesn't suggest that we should get to RCEP as yet. For example, if you look into this block of 15 countries, of which 11 countries we are running a trade deficit, and Indian trade deficit last year was 184 billion, of which 108 billion were to these countries, and India imports 34% of its commodities from this region and exports only 21% to this region. So, until and unless we get a favorable deal in terms of some of the concerns which we have raised, I think it's equally it's good that we have not got into an RCEP, because our past experience, if you look into this free trade agreement, I think they have not been good. Apart from SAFTA, all other free trade agreements, all other agreements, if you look into, actually there has been a deterioration in trade deficit of India across trading partners. So, while it is good to say that India should get into a trade bloc to get the benefits, to get all the benefits which are associated with it, we should also look into the other side of the story, whereby the trade deficit of India with China today is 25 or to 30% of the overall trade deficit of the country. So, until and unless we don't solve that problem, I think specifically for sectors like electronics, where we have just been able to get self-sufficiency, I think it will be foolhardy to get into the RCEP as of yet.
Yes, but what about the point that Mr. Mehta made, that we are already flooded with Chinese goods. We are already in that position to some extent, and if we keep protecting ourselves, how will we come to a situation where we compete?
No, but the two wrongs doesn't make a right. So, even if I take that point that there has been an import of China's goods from India, but if you look into the China-US trade war which has happened in the last year, I think India has benefited from that trade war to some extent, because Indian exports to China has increased a little bit. So, my sense is that while it is perfectly appreciable to appreciate that yes, there has been imports from China, the industry has expressed concerns, but at the same point of time we cannot allow that say trade deficit, which is currently around 50 to 60 billion with China, to say go up to 80 to 90, because that will only kill the industry even more.
Mr. Mehta, you want to come back on that? Under what circumstances could we, even justify allowing entire industries and sectors to, go under?
No, I mean, if you ask any good economist, and this is something what I have learned, the deficit by itself is not bad. So therefore, to continue to holler about deficit is a very wrong. Ultimately, it is made up by investment flows. If you look at the balance of payments, as far as India is concerned, we have always been in the positive. So now, today, US under Trump's guidance, under Trump's thinking, is fighting the world over, fighting trade wars with India, with China. China, of course, is the worst. Even European Union, which have been their traditional allies, because the deficit which they run with them is quite high. So, I mean that I think is what we must try to understand. That deficit per se is not bad. It is going to happen. You cannot have a trade surplus with all the countries. On the other side, I mean, can we imagine how we can reach a trade surplus situation? That would be very difficult to imagine. We are in trade surplus with many countries, but that is not the point. Secondly, and the Prime Minister even today made this statement about India wanting to become a $5 trillion economy. No economy in the world has grown without strong exports. And that is what we need to think about. And naturally, in order to have strong exports, you also have to have good imports. Now, if you look at the deficit, again, let me define deficit in terms of India and US, which has been something which Trump has been talking about, and is relevant to this discussion about RCEP as well, is while the deficit on paper it is $21 billion, if you look at the value added component, which is the amount of imports which go into exports, it is hardly $5 billion. So one has to be a little sensible about how we treat these issues rather than to continue to create a kind of fear psychosis about deficits. I mean, all countries The US economy, as I said, has huge deficit, but is it floundering? It is not floundering.
Okay. Dr. Ghosh, I'm going to let you respond to that. The format of this discussion is a face-off, two people with different points of view. So I'm going to let you respond to some of the points Mr. Mehta has made. Yes.
No, let me just take the example of US. I think this example has been given several times, but I'll give it. US runs has the largest current account deficit in the country. So by that logic, the US dollar should have been weakening over the time. But the paradox is that US dollar is the reserve currency. So therefore, even if US runs a higher trade deficit, that has absolutely no relation with how its currency behaves. But if India runs a higher trade deficit, because in India the money creation is not only endogenous, it is also exogenous, because there is a lot of capital flows into the country. So therefore, for the Indian case, if it runs a trade deficit and hence a current account deficit, the currency is actually adversely impacted. So my point is that we should not look, the good economics should demand that we should not look at the things in isolation. Trade treaties should always be taken as a give and take relationship. You give something, we take something. I am sure that the intervening period which India could get into some sort of bilateral negotiations with these countries, and the trade negotiations when India is trying to explore with the USA, or for example with the European Union. In my sense, if the experience of the free trade agreement has shown to India over the last decade and so, India's trade deficit has increased with most of the countries, because there has been studies which shows that the FTA utilization has been very low. So until and unless we build up the infrastructure, we build up the coastal areas, and we build up the special SEZs, I think all these things are important for India to attain an export target of 1 trillion, which the government wants to achieve in quest for a 5 trillion economy.
Okay, but can we do that without this kind of a free trade agreement in place, or being out of this kind of a free trade agreement? Is the question. On the other hand, let me take this to Mr. Mehta. At this point, where we're already in the midst of an economic slowdown, the argument is that signing this deal, getting into part of this deal, would be a death blow to local industry. Whether it's the dairy sector, whether it's consumer durables, all of these industries, if we can't survive right now, I understand the concept of tough love, that let everyone be competitive. But the fact is, it's the government's duty to also ensure that these sectors don't go under a deluge of competition that they can't face up to for whatever reason. The fact is that we can't compete right now.
I agree with you. Now, I gave you the example, a live example in Indian history, when we lost the dispute on import of consumer goods, quantitative restrictions. What happened? There was a similar hullabaloo throughout the country that all our small scale units will shut down. Now, one important thing which Dr. Ghosh does not seem to have addressed is the kind of trade diversion which will take place when most investments will flow into those countries which are member of RCEP, and we will suffer as a consequence of the negativity about this same thing. What about that? Now, can we afford to be out of the game? We did not resign from the WTO, did we? We continue to stick in. And our trade, which used to be 0.6% in 95, went up to over 2% share of the global world trade. 300 million people came out of poverty. So, any of these trade agreements, they could be, some sectors where, of course, the negotiators were very smart. They did sort of negotiate for longer timelines or safeguard triggers, etc. Yeah. Now, how far they were able to achieve or not is something which we still have to see. And as the minister has said, we'll wait for 1 year and to see if they come back with whatever we've demanded, if they can agree to what we have demanded to some extent.
Right.
My bottom line is that we need to grow, and we need to grow and you cannot grow without exports. And exports, you require these kind of deals. Without these deals, you will lose. There is a negative aspect also, as I said. There is trade diversion which is going to happen.
Is there a sense, Mr. Ghosh, is there a sense that if we had gotten into this deal, and of course with safeguards in place, which were part of the negotiations, it would have kick-started or given a big boost to the process of becoming competitive exports-wise, which we anyway need to do. You argue for that as well. But this would have given the right, momentum to it, been the right catalyst?
No, I see. I think somewhere there is also another angle we are not addressing in the debate. If you look into the experience of Vietnam and Bangladesh in the last 1 year or so, after the US and China trade war has taken place,
Right.
they have actually taken the place of the apparel exports, and India has actually lagged behind. So does that mean ki because of the trade deal India has not been able to take advantage? It is because of the India's inefficiencies in export infrastructure, India has not been able to gain that export momentum. So while the RCEP deal, any trade deal is welcome, but given the fact that after the global financial crisis there has been an exponential jump in the South-South trade, so we should actually get into these deals like RCEP, but that should be at our own time and our own decision, because at the end of the day, yes, if there has been, if suppose for example you get into a trade deal, there could be a price discovery, but then by that logic let us also liberalize the automobile imports. So the automobile imports, I mean, then there is no need to protect the automobile industry also. So I think there is an employment aspect also. As you know that there is a lot of people employed with these sectors, and the examples of the dairy sector is the most one, because New Zealand exports more than 90% of its dairy exports to the country. So as long as we don't safeguard it in terms of possible measures in the future, I think it is not the right and appropriate time to get into a trade deal like RCEP.
What is going to change in the foreseeable future which will make it the right time? That's really the question, because like the minister says, maybe in another year. What really are those favorable, one thing which has come again and again and we haven't talked about is the idea of reciprocity. We weren't getting as much access for our service sector, which is our strength, which we needed.
See, it's a matter of little detail, and we can't discuss all this in a 20 or 30 minutes program. Now, in terms of services sector, the ASEAN, which is again a closely integrating economic union, itself does not have any movement of natural persons. That's one argument they have made against India's demand on that particular force. Now, what I say again and again is that there are gravitational forces. So it is not as if Bangladeshis are not working in Singapore or Indians are not working in Indonesia. There is already quite a good flow, except we wanted to lock it down in the agreement. Now, even if you are not able to lock it down in the agreement, it does not mean that natural gravity flows will not happen in the context of movement of people. Now, an important thing which Dr. Ghosh mentioned, on which all of us are in agreement, that we require a lot of domestic reforms. Now, my point was that 91 we launched reforms, and it's now 30 years. Do you think our industry is still infant? I gave you the example of consumer goods imports. We removed small scale reservation, which is an important aspect of the socialistic economy that we practiced then, and we continue to practice even today. What happened? Did we lose out? We did not lose out. We, on the contrary, gained, because it's sort of rising tide lifted all the boats. The quality of even your ballpoint pens improved. Before 91, you used to get shitty ballpoint pens.
It's a compelling argument.
Today you have all the well-known brands in the world making ball pens in India.
Yeah.
I'm giving only one example. I could quote several other examples. I'll leave it at that.
No, I get the idea. I get the idea. Since you put that to Dr. Ghosh, I'm going to let him quickly respond before I wrap up. I'm running out of time.
No, obviously, see, nobody is denying that export could be an engine for growth. I am not saying that. I am only saying that the time is not appropriate for India to get into an RCEP, because there are several issues which needs to be sorted out, and I am confident that over the next 1 year or so, this ratchet effect, this tariff base year, this addressing the concerns of the agriculture industry, and most probably the service sector which you mentioned, because India runs actually a surplus of service with the rest of the world. So I think that over the next 1 year or so, things will be sorted out, and I am sure India will be able to get into the global supply chain.
Okay, well, it's a fine balancing act, and great arguments from both sides. Thank you for coming in with your perspective, and I hope our viewers have also gained something from watching the different perspectives on whether India should have stayed in the RCEP deal, or was it the right move to bow out, at least at this point. With that, I want to thank all of you for joining us on the India Development Debate this evening.